Week one feedback. Going through everyone's assignments so far, I've noticed just a couple things that I'd like to just expand upon. There was some very good feedback on a lot of the assignments, especially considering how this is week one. In week one, there's usually a lot of really good ideas going out there, and I'm going to hopefully hone some of these ideas to provide a little more information so that everyone can learn from it. But as always, please feel free to send me some questions or some feedback. If your experience tells you something different than what I've stated, please let me know. I will be more than happy to discuss it and see where we can go from there. I'm always for people stretching the envelope. So first topic here, data gathering frequency and forecast variation. There was a couple people who had mentioned that the more you gather the data, the quicker, the better the lower the variation in your forecast. Although that can be true, just remember that if you have any short-term spikes that are from what I would call special variation, the variation that comes from special causes that are not common to the system, like for instance, let's say the demand for aluminum foil spiked because of asteroid particles, which is a 1 in a million chance. I know I'm really making something that's weird, but obviously if you take that demand forecast at that point and you see a high spike in demand, you go, oh my goodness, my demand is higher, and you may react accordingly. You still need to take your data gathering within the context of previous data. I'm going to post something on variation where sometimes you'll use what's called a running metric, where you may take like the last 3 months, and as you go forward, you may drop the last, drop the last data. So you always have the most recent 3 months of data, and you may go forward. You may choose 2 months, 1 month, whatever. There's always a risk that if that gap is too narrow, you may not have enough of a sample set to give you your true demand and your true demand variation. As I mentioned before, variation, well, as I'm going to mention in a post that you're probably going to get Tuesday, variation is something that should be understood and reduced. You can't always eliminate all variation, and it's very hard to try to eliminate it because seasonality, certain things may come up that may increase your variation unexpectedly. The best thing to do is to understand the variation and try to reduce it. Now, you can induce artificial variation through inaccurate forecasting data. You may have people sampling it in different parts of the demand chain, like let's say a retailer may give you different data than a distributor, and sometimes there could just be errors in the data collecting by either of those. So sometimes the way you aggregate the information is also very important. So just keep that in mind. So product support and the canary in the coal mine. I made a mention this of a couple people in the class that usually product support or the customer service folks are the first to detect supply chain changes due to customer reactions to products. And everyone's probably seen it. You buy a product and sometimes the product doesn't meet your satisfaction. So customer support will detect that customer demand may decrease because of this lack of satisfaction, or maybe there's a design flaw or something that causes the customer reaction such that future demand may change. Or sometimes product support will realize that some customers, and I've actually seen this, some customers say, hey, look, just so you know, I'm going to be needing a whole bunch of these widgets within the next 3 or 4 months because of bad weather, asteroid impact, or whatever. So what can happen is customer service goes, oh my goodness, I need to tell you. But in many cases, in most organizations that I've studied and that I've worked for, product support and customer service are disconnected from the supply chain. Marketing is usually also disconnected from supply chain. This week we had a lot of marketing questions that really came out, and if you think of these marketing questions as a supply chain guy or girl, pardon me, you may think differently than a marketing person do. Therefore, the organization as a whole's reaction to that marketing data or that supply chain data will differ based upon what's more important, either making a whole bunch of stuff or selling a whole bunch of stuff. So just keep that in mind as we go forward. So demand spikes and long-term profitability. There's a couple people that mentioned that when you have artificial scarcity, such as like you suddenly decrease the number of items available in a market, you have a demand spike in the short term, because people end up going, oh my goodness, there's a scarcity of these products. The price goes up and profitability goes up in the short term. But in the long term, what happens is the customer is going to hedge his bet, his or her bet. So, for instance, let's say a very good idea, Black Friday or holiday shopping. We had this discussion in the last course that I taught, where Nintendo likes to artificially create scarcity such that they'll only make so many so that they can charge a lot of money for their consoles. This is something that Nintendo has done for a very long time. They're famous for this. And Sony was also. When they were the big people on the block, they would do this a lot because they'd be able to pretty much write their ticket. And Apple does this to a certain extent with the iPhone. I had a person in my last class, who worked for Apple, and he was telling us that Apple actually designs this into their demand forecasting and how many consoles or how many phones they're going to make. So in the short term, this works out fine. People want your product and they buy your product, but in the long term, they're going to decide, well, maybe I might want to look for a substitute. So ease of substitutability is a very important concept within this. So they go, well, I might not be able to get this Nintendo console, but who else provides a product? And maybe Sony provides something that's very close to it. So they may say, well, I'm not going to put up with this artificial scarcity or the inability to get a product. Instead, I'm going to go to a consumer. And Apple has felt this to some point when Samsung came in and started to take some of the business from the iPhone. Product utility is very important. Once again, if someone can get the same amount of utility from a substitute as they can from your product, they'll be more apt to go to their product. So although everyone who is saying that profitability will increase when you have scarcity and you will have a demand increase, you are fundamentally true. It is realized that there are some caveats to this. There will be a lot of caveats that I bring up in this class. Just realize that these caveats are something that we just need to expand upon. So increased product lines and system complexity. What was kind of missed in the MedTech example was the fact that they had all these product lines. When you increase product lines in a system, you increase the complexity of the system exponentially. Okay, and this is an important concept in any system. Anytime you increase the variety in a system, you increase its complexity. Now, there are things I'm going to talk about in a minute, principles of postponement, where you could do something to address this complexity. But just realize that if you increase product lines, you will generally have an increase in system complexity, which in general creates a much more difficult time for a supply chain to address these issues as they go forward. So just some things to keep in mind. As I said, these are all very good answers, but I just want to provide this just to give you something to think about as we move forward. Now, this is Deming systems diagram. I just want to go over this very briefly. I use this in all my courses, and you'll rarely see this, but this shows the supply chain as a closed loop. Basically, in the bottom, this is an organizational diagram, but you can replace receiving, production, inspection, and distribution with manufacturers, distributors, and retailers, and then the customers, and then the product is used, product support, and product design or redesign. So if you notice, once a customer gets the product, they use the product, the first person who gets feedback about the product is product support. If you have a customer service line. If there's no customer service, then you lose the ability to understand how the customer finds utility or uses your product. And as a result, your ability to learn from your product and to learn from the customer's use of your product is very limited. Some companies I've seen reduce product support to mainly a bookkeeping function where you call in, they log your problem, and then they may send you a new product, or they may have something on a website. Although that is useful to a point, it really misses the value in having a product support function. Product support, when it's linked with marketing and with product design, is a very useful tool in creating a spiral design where you can holistically evolve a product. And while also understanding how your product is performing within the environment that it is intended for. So just keep that in mind. As always, please feel free to provide feedback in the class if I can ever clarify any of this for you.